All right, guys, let's finish up the second half of part 5 of Rene Descartes' A Discourse on the Method. But if one asks why the blood in the veins is not all used up by flowing continually in this way into the heart, and why the arteries are not too full because all the blood which passes through the heart goes into them, I need only to repeat the answer already given by an English doctor who must be praised for having broken the ice on this subject. He was the first to show that there are many small passages at the extremities of the arteries through which the blood they receive from the heart enters the small branches of the veins, from which it immediately goes back to the heart so that its course is nothing but a perpetual circulation. Reminds me of some product that we sell at work. It's like this tube. It's for your garden. And it looks like a solid black pipe. But if you stretched it out, you can see it has holes in it. So the water's constantly kind of like secreting along the whole line. You know what I mean? It's like it has very small pores. Um, he was the first to show that there are many small passages at the extremities of the arteries through which the blood they receive from the heart enters the small branches of the veins, from which it immediately goes back to the heart, so that its course is nothing but a perpetual circulation. He proves this very well from the common experience of surgeons who, having bound an arm moderately tightly above the point where they open a vein, make the blood flow out more abundantly than if they had not bound the arm. And the opposite would happen if they bound the arm below, between the hand and the vein being open, or if they bound it very tightly above. For it is obvious that the moderately tight ligature, while being able to prevent the blood that is already in the veins from returning to the heart through the veins, cannot stop on that account fresh blood arriving from the arteries, because they are situated below the veins and their walls, being harder, are less easy to compress. And because the blood coming from the heart tends to flow through the arteries to the hand with greater force than it does when returning from the hand towards the heart through the veins. And because the blood comes out of the arm through the opening in one of the veins, there must necessarily be some passages below the ligature, that is to say, towards the extremities of the arm, through which it can come from the arteries. He also proves very well what he says about the circulation of the blood. First, by certain small membranes, which are disposed at various points along the veins in such a way that they do not let blood pass from the center of the body towards its extremities, but only permit it to return from the extremities towards the heart. Second, by the experiment that shows that all blood in the body can flow out of it in a very short space of time by a single artery when it is cut, even if it is tightly bound close to the heart and cut between the heart and the ligature, so that there was no reason to imagine that the blood that flows out comes from anywhere but the heart. I wanna Google something. The body's extremities. The body's extremities. Google, come on, Google. Oh, it's the body's extremities. Bodies. Come on, man. The body's extremities. So let's keep going. But there are many other things which are evidence of the fact that the true cause of this movement of the blood is as I have said it is. First, there was a difference to be observed between the blood which issues from the veins and that which issues from the arteries. This can only be due to the fact that, being rarefied and, as it were, distilled and passing through the heart, it is thinner, more lively, and hotter straight after leaving it, that is to say, while in the arteries. That is, that it is shortly before entering the heart, that is to say, while in the veins. And if one makes a careful observation, one will find this difference is only clearly perceptible close to the heart, and not as perceptible in the parts more distant from it. Next, the hardness of the walls of which the vena arteriosa and the aorta are composed indicates clearly enough that blood beats against these more powerfully than against the veins. And why should the left cavity of the heart and the aorta be larger and wider than the right cavity and the vena arteriosa? If not because the blood of the arteria venosa, having been in the lungs only since it left the heart, is thinner and becomes more easily rarefied than the blood which flows directly from the vena cava? And what can physicians find out from taking the pulse if they did not know that, as the nature of blood changes, it can be rarefied by the heart? And what can physicians find out from taking the pulse if they did not know that, as the nature of blood changes, It can be rarefied by the heat of the heart to a greater or lesser degree and more or less quickly than before. And if we examine how this heat communicates itself to the other membranes of the body, must we not admit that this happens by means of the blood, which is reheated as it passes through the heart and spreads from there throughout the body? So define, what was that fucking word I just had it, guys? Define extremities. The furthest point or limit of something. The extreme degree or nature of something. The body's extremities. Extremities of the body. A limb of the body such as the arm or leg. The legs from the hip to the toes, including the knees and ankles. Upper extremities, the arms from the shoulder to the hands, even the wrists. The shoulder is a ball and a socket joint. The humerus is a long bone, and the upper arm, the elbow, is a hinge joint, and the forearm is made up of the radius and ulna bones. So the extremities, that's your arms and legs. A limb of the body, such as the arm or leg. From which it follows that if we remove blood from some part of the body, we remove heat by the same means as well. And even if the heart were as hot as a piece of glowing iron, it would not have sufficient heat to warm up the hands and feet as it does at present, unless it continually sent new blood to them. Then too we know from this that the true function of breathing is to bring enough fresh air into the lungs to cause the blood entering them from the right cavity into the heart, where it has been rarefied, as it were changed into vapor, to thicken up and convert itself once more into blood before falling back into the left cavity. If it did not do this, it would not be fit to nourish the fire that is there. So if we remove blood from some part of the body, we remove the heat. I gotta highlight the whole thing. From which it follows that if we remove blood from some part of the body, we remove heat by the same means as well. And even if the heart were as hot as a piece of glowing iron, it would not have sufficient heat to warm up the hands and feet as it does at present, unless it continually. And even if the heart were as hot as a piece of glowing iron, it would not have sufficient heat to warm up the hands and feet as it does at present, unless it continually sent new blood to them. Then too we know from this that the true function of breathing is to bring enough fresh air into the lungs to cause the blood entering them from the right cavity into the heart, where it has been rarefied, as it were changed into vapor, to thicken up and convert itself once more into blood before falling back into the left cavity. If it did not do this, it would not be fit to nourish the fire that is there. All this is confirmed by the fact that we see that animals not having lungs have also only one cavity in the heart, and that unborn children who cannot use their lungs while in their mother's womb have an aperture through which blood flows from the vena cava into the left cavity of the heart, and a duct by which it comes from the vena arteriosa to the aorta without passing through the lung. And then how could digestion occur in the stomach if the heart did not send heat there through the arteries, together with some of the most fluid parts of the blood, which help to dissolve the food that we ingested? And is it not easy to understand the action which converts the juice of this food into blood? If we consider that the blood is distilled perhaps more than 100 or 200 times every day by passing repeatedly through the heart, and what else is needed to explain nutrition and the production of the various humors present in the body, other than to say that the force with which the blood passes as it rarefies from the heart to the extremities of the arteries causes some of its parts to come to rest in the parts of the members in which they then find themselves, and there take the place of the other parts which they expel, and that according to the position, shape, or small size of the pores they encounter, some parts of the blood rather than others flow to certain places, in the same way that we see that sieves with the different grades of mesh serve to separate different grains from each other. And finally, the most remarkable thing about all this is the generation of animal spirits, which, like a very subtle wind, or rather like a very pure and living flame, rise continually in great abundance from the heart to the brain, pass from there through the nerves into the muscles, and impart movement to all our members. And finally, the most remarkable thing about all this is the generation of animal spirits, which, like a very subtle wind, or rather like a very pure and living flame, rise continually in great abundance from the heart to the brain, pass from there through the nerves into the muscles, and impart movement to all our members. Let me stop there. So what is that word that I was looking for? what is it? Rarefied, rarefied. Define rarefied, rarefied. Of air, especially that at high altitudes, of lower pressure than usual. So distant from the lives and concerns of ordinary people, that's just like to be rare, right? Esoteric, exclusive, select. But of air, especially that at high altitudes, of lower pressure than usual, thin, like thin air, rarefied air, rarefied, like thin, maybe the thinning of blood. We do not need to suppose any other cause to impel the most agitated and the most penetrating parts of the blood, and hence the best suited to compose these spirits to make their way to the brain rather than anywhere else, than that the arteries that carry them are those which come most directly from the heart, and that according to the rules of mechanics, which are the same as those of nature, when many things tend to move together towards the same place in which there is not room for them all, as in the case of the parts of the blood that leave the left cavity of the heart and flow towards the brain, the weaker or less agitated must of necessity be displaced by the stronger, which by this means reach their destination on their own. According to the rules of mechanics, which are the same as those of nature, when many things tend to move together towards the same place in which there is not room for them all, as in the case of the parts of the blood that leave the cavity of the heart and flow towards the brain, the weaker or less agitated must of necessity be displaced by the stronger, which by this means reach their destination on their own. I had explained all these matters in considerable detail in the treatise which I had earlier intended to publish, and I had then shown what structure the nerves and the muscles of the human body must have to enable the animal spirits, being inside that body, to have the power to move its members, as we observe in the case of severed heads, which we can see moving and biting the earth shortly after having been cut off, although they are no longer animate. I had also shown what changes must occur in the brain to cause states of waking, sleeping, and dreaming. How light, sound, smells, taste, heat, and all the other qualities of external objects can imprint various ideas on the brain through the intermediary of the senses. How hunger, thirst, and the other internal passions can also transmit ideas to the brain. What must be taken to be the sensus communis in which these are received, the memory which preserves them, and the faculty of imagination. What must be taken to be the sensus communis in which these are received, the memory which preserves them, and the faculty of imagination, which can change them in different ways, form them into new ideals, form them into new ideas, and by the same means distribute animal spirits to the muscles and make the members of this body move with respect both to the objects which present themselves to the senses and to the internal passions in as many different ways as the parts of our bodies can move without being directed by our will. This will not appear at all strange to those who know how to This will not appear at all strange to those who know how wide a range of different automata or moving machines the skill of man can make using only very few parts. This will not appear at all strange to those who know how wide a range of different automata, like automaton, or moving machines the skill of man can make using only very few parts in comparison to the great number of bones, muscles, nerves, arteries, veins, and all the other parts which are in the body of every animal. For they will consider this body as a machine which, having been made by the hand of God, is incomparably better ordered and has in itself more amazing movements than any that can be created by man. He just highlighted how perfectly built our bodies are with so few parts. He's talking about design. Design. That's what he's getting at. Design. The design of the heart. At this point, I had dwelt on this issue to show that if there were such machines having the organs and outward shape of a monkey or any other irrational animal, we would have no means of knowing that they were not of exactly the same nature as these animals. Whereas if any such machines resembled us in body and imitated our actions insofar as this was practically possible, we should still have two very certain means of recognizing that they were not, for all that, real human beings. The first is that they will never be able to use words or other signs by composing them as we do to declare our thoughts to others. I find this fascinating. For we can well conceive of a machine made in such a way that it emits words and even utters them about bodily actions, which bring about some corresponding change in its organs. If, for example, we touch it on a given spot, it will ask what we want of it. If we touch it somewhere else, it will cry out that we are hurting it, and so on. But it is not conceivable that it should put these words in different orders to correspond to the meaning of things said in its presence, as even the most dull witted of men can do. And the second means is that although such machines might do many things as well or even better than any of us, they would inevitably fail to do some others by which we would discover that they did not act consciously, but only because their organs were disposed in a certain way. For whereas reason is a universal instrument which can operate in all sorts of situations, for whereas reason is a universal instrument which can operate in all sorts of situations, their organs have to have a particular disposition for each particular action, from which it follows that it is practically impossible for there to be enough different organs in a machine to cause it to act in all of life's occurrences in the same way that our reason causes us to act. I like Hume. He's making a case for why God exists. The machine, I call this, many label this the machine. Machine. Now we can also determine the difference between men and animals by these two means, for it is a very remarkable fact that there are no men so dull-witted and stupid, not even madmen, that they are incapable of stringing together different words and composing them into utterances through which they let their thoughts be known. And conversely, there is no other animal, no matter how perfect and well endowed by birth they may be, that can do anything similar, nor does this arise from lack of organs. For we can see that magpies and parrots can utter words as we do, yet cannot speak like us. That is by showing that they are thinking what they are saying. Whereas men born deaf and dumb, who are deprived as much or more than animals of the organs which in others serve for speech, usually invent certain signs to make themselves understood by those who are their habitual companions and have the time to learn their language. This shows not only that animals have less reason than man, but that they have none at all. For it is clear that we need very little reason in order to be able to speak. And given that as much inequality is found among animals of the same species as among men, and that some are easier to train than others, it is unbelievable that the most perfect monkey or parrot of their species should not be able to speak as well as the most stupid child, or at least a child with a disturbed brain, unless their soul were of a wholly different nature to ours. And speech must not be confused with the natural movements that are signs of passion and can be imitated by machines as well as by animals. Neither must one imagine, as did certain ancient thinkers, that animals speak. Although we do not understand their language, for if that were true, they would be able to make themselves understood by us as well as by other members of their species, since they have many organs that correspond to ours. It is also a very remarkable fact that although many animals show more skill in some of their actions than we correspondingly do, it is nonetheless clear that the same animals show none at all in many others. So that what they can do better than us does not prove that they have any mental powers, for it would follow from this that they would have more intelligence than any of us and would surpass us in everything. Rather, it shows that they have no mental powers whatsoever, and that it is nature which acts in them according to the disposition of their organs. Just as we see that a clock consisting only of ropes and springs can count the hours and measure time more accurately than we can in spite of all our wisdom. Hume's clock. Hume's clock idea. Later I Google all this, even on YouTube. Following this, I had described the rational soul and shown that unlike the other things of which I had spoken, it cannot possibly be derived from the potentiality of matter, but that it must have been created expressly. I described the rational soul and shown that unlike other things of which I had spoken, it cannot possibly be derived from, from potentiality of matter, but that it must have been created expressly. And I had shown how it is not sufficient for it to be lodged in the human body like a pilot in a ship, except perhaps to move its members, but that it needs to be more closely joined and united with the body in order to have, in addition, feelings and appetites like the ones we have, and in this way compose a true man. So that needs to be more closely joined and united with the body in order to have, in addition, feelings and appetites like the ones we have. He's saying there's some supernatural thing there. I dwelt a little at this point on the subject of the soul because it is of the greatest importance. For after the error of those who deny the existence of God, which I believe I have adequately refuted above, there is none which causes weak minds to stray more readily from the narrow path of virtue than that of imagining that the souls of animals are the same nature as our own, and that as a consequence we have nothing more to fear or to hope for after this present life any more than flies and ants. But when we know how different flies and ants are, we can understand much better the arguments which prove that our soul is of a nature entirely independent of the body, and that as a consequence it is not subject to death as the body is. And given that we cannot see any other causes which may destroy the soul, we are naturally led to conclude that it is immortal. For after the error of those who deny the existence of God, which I believe I have adequately refuted above, there is none which causes weak minds to stray more readily from the narrow path of virtue than that of imagining that the souls of animals are of the same nature as our own. And that as a consequence we have nothing more to fear or to hope. And as a consequence, we have nothing more to fear or to hope for after this present life, any more than flies and ants. But when we know how different flies and ants are, we can understand much better the arguments which prove that our soul is of a nature entirely independent of the body. And that as a consequence, it is not subject to death as the body is. So he's saying that the body is independent of the soul. So he's saying there's a duality there, body and soul duality, body and soul duality. The mind and the body separate, the mind and the body separate, duality, which psychology doesn't agree, or modern psychology. And given that we cannot see any other causes which may destroy the soul, we are naturally led to conclude that it is immortal. He makes a good point. Makes a good point. And I want to argue like, well, so, where, who, like, he seems like a human's trying to justify why he should feel that he's greater than any other species. But there's something in you that you want to say that, there's also another argument that's the opposite of that, is that if animals, we're no greater than animals in that sense. If God created us, then we're no greater than His creation of a dog. But He didn't make us different in this sense that we're able to think and reason and have logic. And so there's an idea there that there might be a greater case, because then If there's no God, we justify our bad actions. Like, who cares, right? This is fascinating. It's very abstract and very. It's hard to understand, but I grasp the general idea. And I wanted to say this because his idea of I think, therefore I am, and I thought like even him just coming up with this I like there is a reason why philosophy this is the kick us as humans get out of philosophy, or those who like philosophy who bother to learn it. There's a kick, you get like a profoundness when you finally grasp the understanding of what someone's trying to say. And so I think, therefore I am, and even in doubting something, you prove the idea that you exist, because even yeah, I like this idea. Hume.